wonderful. If you just give me a moment to just speak back with my colleague to make sure that everything is ready, I will update you folks momentarily. Okay, folks, and the 20-second countdown starts in 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion. Today, our topic is addressing sexual violence targeted at Southeast and East Asian communities in higher education. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and I want to thank the university for bringing this important panel discussion together. My name is Kristyn Wong-Tam. I'm a Toronto City Councillor, also a longtime community organizer. I am a proud member of the LGBT community and, of course, a proud member of the Chinese Canadian community. We oftentimes know that Southeast and East Asian people are exoticized, fetishized, desexualized, while we are also perceived as being submissive in some of our cultures. All of this reduces us to very inaccurate stereotypes. It can be very devastating. It also enables a staggering rate of violence, oftentimes perpetuated against us in disproportionate numbers. This session, the one that we will endeavor to undertake today, is going to be an opportunity for us to speak to our panelists who are going to, sorry, I just hear a little bit of siren background. We're going to tackle this important discussion, and I'm hoping that we can explore the impacts and how it intersects with issues such as sexual violence, as I mentioned, but also misogyny, patriarchy, white supremacy. And what does it mean in the spaces where education takes place on university and college campuses? I'm very thrilled to have been asked to moderate this panel discussion. And I'm also very happy that this discussion is taking place in Toronto and abroad. So because our panel discussion is virtual, some of you will not be in Toronto. And I just want to recognize that. Thank you for those who are joining us from a different time zone as well. I'd like to begin, before I go any further, to introduce the panelists. I'd like to acknowledge that we are working on, I am, and many of you are working on and living on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat people. And Toronto remains home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And I want to also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Our panel discussion is going to begin now, and I'd like to take a moment to introduce our incredible, illustrious panelists. Each of them are subject matter experts, and each of them come to the discussion with their own individual identity and, of course, their lived experience. Dr. Joy Masuhara is a family doctor and a clinical assistant professor at the Faculty of Medicine at UBC and is the co-chair of Women Transforming Cities. She has actively been involved with the issues around equity, diversity, inclusion work for many years, and she has the lived experience as a third-generation Japanese Canadian. If we can just say hi to Joy. Jasmine Mendoza is a psychologist providing therapy to students on a wide range of mental health concerns at the University Center for Student Development and Counseling. Previously, he has provided support to social service and criminal justice settings and applies an integrated and inclusive approach to the professional work he delivers. Jai Ching Wilson Yang is a Chinese and Irish trans woman. She works at Consent Comes First at X University. For the past 10 years, she has worked with survivors of gender-based violence, LGBTQ youth, and trans women affected by HIV through direct service, programming, training, and research. Last but not least, I'm very pleased to introduce all of you to Elene Lam, who is the founder and executive director of Butterfly, Asian and Migrant Sex Workers Support Network and the Migrant Sex Workers Project. She has been involved in both the gender and sex work movements for many years, as you know, and she is also well known for her migrant labor activism for the past 2 decades. Welcome, everyone, all of you. My first question, just to open us up in a very light topic, but I know this is a very challenging time, not just because it's the COVID pandemic, but we know that bringing to light is this head of racism, and in particular, anti-Asian racism, which is why we're here. My first question for you, Jai-Ching, is that in your work as a sexual violence specialist, what are the ways that you are seeing and observing sexual violence occur today in with respect to populations that you work with, in particular the East and Southeast Asian survivors? Has COVID-19 made it worse? I cannot hear you.
I was muted.
Okay, great.
Yep. Unmuted now. Everyone, thanks, Kristyn. COVID has definitely impacted folks, especially East and Southeast Asian people. What I run into in my work is a lot more street harassment from people, especially at the beginning of the COVID times that we're still very much in. People sort of staying far away from them, or coming up to them and blaming them for COVID. Right? There was all sorts of violence that we were all seeing, and seeing it particularly targeted at women in a big way, which we may not always link immediately to sexual and gender-based violence, but the way that racism is manifesting and particularly targeting East and Southeast Asian women, it is, I think, real evidence of gender-based violence, is gendered racism. The other thing that I'm seeing kind of across the board with folks of color, and especially with East and Southeast Asian folks and South Asian folks as well, is people coming when things are really, really bad. So people coming to our office for support when things have reached things are quite bad for them, untenable in some ways. They're sort of at a point where the situation has become quite desperate. Whereas what we see more from white clients is people coming in much earlier and feeling more comfortable reaching out for support than I'm seeing from Asian folks coming through. And there's definitely been, as always in this role, I'm seeing a lot of fetishization and stalking, particularly of East and Southeast Asian women. And then also people not necessarily thinking that's what's happening is gender-based violence or sexual violence. So there's also a lot of education that we end up doing with folks that come in. I don't know if this is the problem, but my friend thought maybe.
Yeah, Jai-Ching, thank you. I mean, those are really, I mean, your observations are very important, especially since you're a subject matter expert. I guess when someone does come to you and they're not even sure if they've been harassed, they're not even sure if they've experienced is racism, and they're having a self-doubt, what might be one of the first things that you say to them?
Often I'll ask them, if you saw this happening to a friend, how would you feel about it? Moving the focus away from what's happened to them, because I know for many people, we're more interested in supporting our families, we're more interested in supporting our communities than we are necessarily focused on ourselves and our own well-being, right? Shifting the focus into, well, what would you do if this happened to your sister, or if someone said something like this to your brother? How would you respond? What would you think about it? That kind of shift.
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, obviously making it personal also brings in a lot of empathy in how we approach these situations. And we talked about, the harassment that women identified individuals face. Jasmine, in your work, obviously you work with, I think, both populations, all populations, all genders. Within the Southeast Asian, East Asian men and male identified communities, what type of racism are you seeing? What type of racism is being reported? Does it make a difference if they are straight men in a heteronormative, heterosexist environment? Does it make a difference if they happen to be queer, if they happen to be bisexual or gay? Maybe you can unpack that for us a bit.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that, Kristyn. I think just to kind of come back to the earlier part of your question, I think not only do we see kind of what Jai-Ching was describing, explicit forms of racism occurring and hatred occurring, I think we also see unconscious bias. And I think that implicit type of racism is sometimes so hard to kind of identify, or you're left wondering or doubting, as you had identified earlier. And Jai-Ching rightfully kind of asking people to kind of maybe take a different stance and see, if you were to look at it from that point of view, would you see some type of implicit racism? And most times, at least with the people that I get to see in my work, realize the same thing, that it's like, oh, this was what feels like sometimes can be an insidious form of anti-Asian sentiments and racism expressed. I think with respect to Southeast and East Asian men, if I can just kind of divide this up for a little bit, you know, and sometimes it's just an artificial divide, but it just helps with the discussion, that I think of straight Asian men and the heteronormative scripts that are out there, that very much straight cisgendered Asian men, East Asian, South Asian men are typically ranked as being the lowest on the ladder of desirability, and quite often gives the greater society messages, or embolden society in some ways to emasculate them further. And I think that that's something that I hear quite often from some of the young Asian men that come into my practice, is how often they feel emasculated. And that if you ask women from other cultures, and so this is what the literature and epidemiological survey literature will show, is that if you asked straight women to rank people from other races, who would they select as a partner? Typically, it is straight, cisgendered, Southeast Asian and East Asian men are ranked last, even amongst Asian women themselves. So it can be very disheartening for this group. If I was to kind of move our conversation towards gay, bi, queer, Southeast and East Asian men, it becomes even more complicated in terms of taking into account their sexuality, and how similarly the two things can unfold. One is that they're also seen as least desirable. And I think in recent years, we've seen this in the gay, bi, queer men's community, that if you look at hookup apps, right? So Grindr, Scruff, Jacked, all of these different hookup apps, you'll have seen in some of people's profiles that they say that they're not interested in fat, femmes, and Asian. And so that sends out quite a negative message in terms of whether they're welcomed or not. And I think that this is the problematic thing sometimes, I think, about the narratives out there about the you know, gay men's community, which is that, you know, we're open, right? We're open to you. We welcome everyone. We want to be inclusive, but we don't want to date you, right? At the end of the day. And I think that when I talk to university or college students or young emerging adults, that has quite an impact on their psyche. And again, they're again at the bottom of that ladder of desirability, and that Southeast and East Asian men are relegated to the margins. The second way that I think it's also it impacts this is that if there are people that are indeed seeking out gay Southeast and East Asian men to date or be in relationship with, that they can't help but feel objectified. And I think probably the audience may know out there that sometimes quote unquote rice queens are kind of seen as sometimes being predatory, can be. I'm not saying that all would be, but you know, it leaves some people, again, gay, bi, queer, Southeast and East Asian men wondering, you know, are they liked for who they are as opposed to what they might look like? And there's also tied messages to all of that, which is that, you know, if you are picked as a partner, it's usually you're an effeminate partner, and that gay, bi, queer, Southeast and East Asian men, they can't be doing the choosing. We have to be wallflowers in some ways. So we're waiting to be chosen instead of getting to choose who we'd like to be in a relationship with. And then there are all these stereotypes around, gay, bi, queer, East Asian and Southeast Asian men being the receptive partner. And I think the impact of all of this is that this minority stress, if I can kind of term it that way, really promotes a sense of self-hatred, self-loathing, which then is tied, at least to what I can see out there in the community, increased rates of HIV transmission, as well as mental health concerns, as well as suicide. And so these are the things that I, to just kind of speak to the question that you had posed, Kristyn.
Mm-hmm. Jasmine, thank you. I mean, you've took that question and you really answered it from so many different dimensions. And I think that it's oftentimes the point of view that we don't often hear, is what happens when racism, and in particular sexualized racism, is perpetuated towards East Asian and Southeast Asian men. So I'm just going to ask you one other question, just because I can't leave it unchecked. Where do people go for support? That's East or Southeast Asian men, if they are themselves survivors of sexual violence?
Typically, they may come to their university or college counseling center, or they may come to an office similar to what Jai Ching offers. And in fact, the Center for Student Development Counseling, where I work at, very much collaborates with the Consent Comes First office. And I know that similar offices exist at other universities and colleges across this entire country. And I think those that might not fit within that catchment probably seek out support in community settings, social service settings. But again, it is one of these, the intersectionality of it all. It sometimes feels hard to kind of figure out, is this a mental health concern? Is this a concern with respect to sexual violence? And do I seek out support at an agency or setting there? So it's not always clear, and sometimes it's demarcated. And I think really the reality is that there should be an open door for everybody, right? It doesn't matter what door you go through, right? It's an open door.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, absolutely. I think, Jasmine, what you raise is really important. I'm just going to do a little bit of a turnover and come to Elene for a moment. We've just talked about, racism and how it manifests itself in different communities. And we can't look at the East Asian community, Southeast Asian community as one monolithic group, because clearly there are many subpopulations. And when you want to bring your whole self to the conversation and try to seek help when help is required, sometimes you're forced to leave certain parts of you at the door. And the population that you work for and advocate for and with, specifically those who are migrant status, who are sex workers, it kind of brings another layer of stigma to how they seek help and how they empower themselves and work to end their own oppression. And of course, even having to put out there that sex work is legitimate work, right? It's a choice for some. So I want to be able to ask you a question regarding what happened at the beginning of this year in March. And in particular, what we now know as the Atlanta shootings. A lone gunman walked into massage parlors that are oftentimes staffed by Asian people. He shot and killed 8 individuals. 6 of those individuals were Asian women and Asian sex workers in particular, I think. What happens to a community and how do they heal from that? And how do they deal with the stigma? Because it's not necessarily a topic that is embraced by the larger mainstream Asian community as well.
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. So, because I think this is very important when we talk about anti-Asian racism, to look at the intersectionality, so that like how people being affected differently, as you say, because of the stigma, because of the immigration status, because of the language barrier. So Asian and migrant sex workers being targeted and facing different type of racism so differently. And I think we should not forget, like the shooting is really bring a lot of concern of anti-Asian racism. But we should not forget, the murders say very clearly, they do not only target this woman because they're Asian, they are target them because they want to eliminate them, because they see that it's associated with sex work. So that's kind of hate of sex worker, homophobia is the root of like the violence. And when we talk about violence, and Butterfly keep doing, it's not only looking at the individual violence, but also the systematic violence, particularly the state violence. And so this is not only happened in Atlanta. So in February 2020, it's also happened in Toronto. And this is also happened in many cities and do not draw so much attention. So we are so glad that, I should not say glad, but I mean that is really important to bring the concern about the society of the situation of Asian and migrant sex worker. But we are very disappointed because like the closing down of massage parlor, the targeting of the Asian migrant sex worker is still continues even after the shooting. So, so when we talk about violence, the state's violence, the law enforcement is the major source of violence. So even 3 months after the Atlanta's shooting, the new market have just passed the bylaw and then calling for more investigation of massage parlor, and also they changed the bylaw, only the people with college credential can work. That means the racialized migrant cannot speak English, cannot work anymore. So this is the systematic violence make people be more vulnerable. And why Asian and migrant sex worker being targeted is because of the hate of the sex worker and because of the criminalization. Is not only criminal law, but the immigration prohibition of people work in sex industry. We work with a lot of international students that they also fear they will lose their immigration status when they find, and also all these bylaw make them become the target by the perpetrator because they know that they cannot have anyone support them, they cannot seek help, and the law enforcement also is the major source of violence. So recently, because of the anti-trafficking funding, what the law enforcement go into place, they just lock the woman up, you know, take all the money, device, and sometimes sexual harassment from the law enforcement also happen. So, and I'm so glad today you are the moderator, because I think at the beginning, particularly when Butterfly tried to organize the worker, we received so little support because the people think that if I stand with the sex worker, that is not having a good reputation. But I think it is very great that you are working with us. You really see the sex worker issue is the racial justice issue, human rights issue, workers issue, and the gender equality issue. So that's why we really hope to call for more people concerning the anti-Asian racism. At the same time, really look at who are being affected most, and also that how the law and policy create that violence against the worker. Yeah.
Elene, thank you, and thank you for that very kind compliment. One thing that I've observed, and I need to just lean into this question, but one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that you talked about state violence, because in the Atlanta shooting, it looks like on surface the perpetrator is the lone gunman. But what I'm hearing from you is that the state response after that mass shooting was that they went after the massage parlors and workers. Is that widely known? Because I think we've all heard about the shooting and we've heard about the murder, but I don't think most of us, and I certainly haven't. I haven't heard about the crackdown on actually the workers in the massage parlors.
Yeah, so this is ongoing. So why massage parlor become the target of different perpetrator is because of the stigma, right? So that like they are being seen as illegal, they are seen as immoral women, that is encouraged the hate against this massage parlor. And also the criminalization, that different kind of law and targeting from the law enforcement. From Atlanta, you see that actually the spa have been targeted by the law enforcement that make the people cannot get any support. So this is not happen in US, but also happen like in Canada. So that is something have been going on. And we hope that the shooting will make the people change the way they see this issue, but we are very disappointed the targeting is still continuous. More place, shut down the place and make people cannot work. And I think the most important part why racism play out is because the workers' voice being dismissed, right? We have 300 workers organized, went to City of Toronto to say, I'm not traffic victim, this is my work. But they are being either seen as illegal, they are unrespectable people, I don't need to listen to them, or they are being seen as they're the ignorant a victim, they do not know how to consent, they do not know how to represent themselves and need the white savior. You know, we see all this deputation have the white savior say, I need to rescue them by shutting down the work. So that's why I think continue to support the organizing of the worker to speak for themselves and continues to be the strong ally, because in the white supremacy play out is the worker themselves is not being listened in the political system and policy making process. So that's why we need the strong allies from the Asian community, particularly people, you know, with different associated with different human rights organization, racial justice organization, even the violence against gender-based violence sector. They really see that this is an important issue, that we need to stop the violence and stop the state's violence. Yeah.
Thank you. And final question for you. True or false? Migrant sex workers, some of them are post-secondary students.
Yes,
True or
yes,
false?
yes, the international student. That's why, because now the international immigration law stop anyone, even they have work permit, to work in sex-related industry. So this also create the vulnerability of the people, that they can be the target and difficult to seek help, because they may be kicked out from Canada or lost their immigration status if they found work in sex industry. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You know, I'm gonna ask a question of Joy. Joy, you are a family physician. You have worked on the receiving side of trauma. People come to you for their medical needs, and you, I know, are approaching your work with an intersectional lens. You know, when you have been in the business for as long as you have and providing care to the community, what are the trends that you are seeing in Vancouver, or perhaps in your work with counterparts across the country? Are you seeing a rise of, number one, anti-Asian racism and hate? And how do you treat that as a medical doctor? Because not every racial scar ends up being a physical scar. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, thank you, Kristyn. Before I start, I would just like to acknowledge, because I'm coming from Vancouver, that I'm on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and you know, thank you to Ryerson X University for this amazing conference. I know we're talking about anti-Asian racism. But I also just like to reflect that, you know, for me, and, you know, I think hopefully for all of us, we also reflect on the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and that this work, you know, all of this work applies across the board. And I know that we're working in solidarity. So, you know, in terms of healthcare workers and anti-Asian racism, or, you know, just the experience of healthcare workers, of course, it's kind of a tough question to ask, because their experiences across the board, right? So, you know, across the spectrum of, you know, good to bad, and you know, it can change over time, geography, and really experiences of racialized healthcare workers hasn't been really widely studied. So, you know, in our region, we're just starting to collect disaggregated data on our healthcare workforce. So we don't even know, you know, what our workforce is comprised of in terms of, you know, diversity metrics. So when we look at the systems in general, we have, you know, our Western healthcare system, and like many other systems, they're largely colonial constructs, and they continue to struggle with systemic racism. So, you know, it wasn't long ago that some faculties of medicine had exclusionary policies. So women couldn't be physicians. Asians were excluded, and lots of other communities. So our systems are and continue to be hierarchical, with leadership being mostly white, and a higher proportion of racialized people being in the lower job status, lower pay categories in healthcare. So as part of my DEI work in Vancouver, we've started to look at the experience of racialized physicians. So I can speak a little bit about what they're experiencing and what they've been experiencing. And we've conducted a series of focus groups. And one series has been with physicians of color, and with a subcategory of women physicians of color. And most of the participants were women women identifying physicians from South Asian and East Asian demographics. So, and this is what we heard. Racist experiences occur. Surprise, surprise. Both macro and microaggressions, and they're coming from everywhere. So they come from colleagues, they come from supervisors, they come from the healthcare leadership, they come from patients. So things like comments like, I want to see the white doctor, are being mistaken for a nurse. These are fairly common things that we hear from our healthcare workers. There is an intersectional element to all of the experiences, and it becomes blurred, whether it's is this racist? Is this based on my gender? Is this based on my age? Other intersections. Power dynamics often present. So in many of the interactions and many of the negative experiences, the stories were often happening, during training. So medical students and residents in training, where there's incredible power inequities, and students and residents being very vulnerable. These things were happening. I can give an example of my own experience as a trainee. So I'm doing a rotation in a hospital. I'm on the ward. I'm on a unit, doing my rounds and going to see patients. And one white male patient asks me to give him a back rub. That was, this is, and as a trainee, particularly in some of our healthcare, particularly physicians, I would say, you're just going from one patient to the next. I can't even remember what my response was in that incident, but I do remember the incident 30 years later. So these things have impact. They may seem like a small thing, but they all add up. All these aggressions. The other thing we heard very loudly was that speaking up about discrimination was very difficult for a multitude of reasons. The model minority myth, lands in there, the not knowing where to speak up to, and then that whole power dynamic where you feel like there's no way. We were hearing things like, there's no way I'll ever speak up because I'm in this position of vulnerability. And then those that did speak up, they either had a negative experience or nothing changed, which I think we really need to pay attention to, that sometimes our institutional responses can be more damaging actually than the discriminatory incident itself. Because it really erodes trust. It disengages your worker from their work environment, etc. And that's not good for healthcare workers, for patients, or the system as a whole. And then the other thing that came out strongly in our focus groups was that racialized physicians did not see themselves reflected in leadership, and that this is something that we also need to pay attention to. And they also said that, even if they did try to get to the table, the leadership table, they were often not heard once they got there. So I think there's lots of different experiences, and has there been more anti-Asian racism in the healthcare force lately because of COVID? Yes, of course there has been. And I don't want to just say all the negatives. There are some positive experiences as well. So the power of having for one participant, the power of having one white male ally, supervisor ally, was life-changing for them. It had them, instead of leaving their program, staying and continuing, and staying actually in the region. And the other thing is that the racialized physicians note that their the relationship with patients of the same cultural background is easier. There's more trust that happens, particularly if language, if language is a barrier and they are able to have capacity with the language. That those things make it easier, and there is now some research showing better health outcomes when we have healthcare workers that reflect the patient. So these are all things that are happening in healthcare.
Joy, thank you so much. I mean, that was really an incredible narrative that you just unpacked for us. And I guess, just because I want to follow up on one thing. So we've heard that there's significant challenges, and there's microaggression, and there's racism, and all of that is true. You have been a trailblazer in the medical field with the positions that you hold. If you could say one or two things to a student who's going to be leaving the university and they want to enter your profession, and some of these and many of these systemic barriers and racial discrimination still exist, what is the one or two things that you can say to them that will equip them so that they can enter your profession ready to do the good work while they still take care of themselves?
Yeah, there are so many things, that we could.
You have to narrow it down to one or two.
Yeah. Okay. Just one or two. All right. So really, I think we need to admit that, our healthcare system still embodies systemic racism, and that incidents will likely happen. This is always challenging for healthcare workers because when we're working with patients, you need to accept that, patients come because they're ill and they're in a vulnerable position themselves. And so there is a power dynamic in being the healthcare worker, particularly a physician. So we need to, I work with older adults, many with dementia. So we see people, responding, behaving, using language that they might not normally use because they're disinhibited because of their illness. And so anyone, most healthcare workers working with seniors with these kinds of illnesses will know that some things come out that normally would not come out. This is not usual behavior. Unfortunately, when the filters are off, that unconscious racism, sexism, et cetera, will all come out. So we learn to really have thick skins. But I think a really important thing is that we do, speak to each other, that we support each other, and that we start doing this in training, and that we see self-care and peer support not as weaknesses, but as strengths, and that are part of how we learn to care for our patients as well. So that would be, I think, the main message. I have lots of other things that I think we need to do as well. But I'll leave that there.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think not just for those who are entering your profession, just for life and survival in general, self-care, right? I'm going to just read you folks a quote, and I know that our topic is about sexual violence that's targeted towards East and Southeast Asian people, and I can't help but think that when we're talking about sexualized violence, oftentimes it's about women. So it actually would be appropriate for me to quote a Democrat in the U.S. House of Representatives, Grace Meng, and she says, "We've been taught our entire life just to fit in, just to be quiet, don't speak up, be invisible, and if you are invisible enough to be you will then be seen as American." Now, although we are not Americans, I couldn't help but feel like her remarks could have been said to just about anybody who belongs to the Asian diaspora that is a racial minority in their community. And I know that in my case as a city councillor, sometimes it's best to keep my head down. It's hard because I'm a public figure, but we have all been told to sit down and take our place. And our place is not at the podium, it's not taking up leadership, and it's certainly not speaking up or defending ourselves. So this sentiment really rings true. What can you say, what can you share from your personal reflections that will help us address this? Because I don't want to sit down, I don't want to be quiet anymore, and I think based on what Joy just said, we shouldn't. And we have to be able to say that to the generation that's coming up behind us. Who wants to start? Jai Ching?
Yeah, I can start. I think things that I really want to be seeing happening for folks that are growing up now, or folks that are coming to school, as this kind of panel, this kind of discussion. I think it's really quite exciting to be seeing that. And I think as representation can take us so far, as we start to see more blockbuster movies with particular kinds of Asians being represented, I remain hopeful that the diversity of East and Southeast Asian people will start to be more recognized. And I think we're going to be running some programming in the winter for East and Southeast Asian survivors, which is a new thing for us here in the office, and I'm quite excited to be doing that work with folks. I think building those connections. What I'm noticing, especially when I speak with my father, who's from Hong Kong, and has been here since the 70s, is that when I was a teenager and I was getting upset about racism, I was just starting to learn about colonization at that point in time, becoming quite angry and riled up about it. My dad couldn't talk to me about race, but over the last few years, in no small part because of the huge work that Black communities and Indigenous communities have been doing to protest and fight against racist violence and colonization, race is becoming more of a topic of conversation. So my father is actually able to engage with me now in conversations around racism and the kind of racism that he experiences at work, which I've been getting probably, as a teenage child of my father, like probably pushing a little too hard for him to recognize some of it as racism. But so I'm seeing that shift, and I think that is really exciting. And I want to see more of that. And I think on the flip side of that, like this idea of like being seen as invisible, like that gets played into, I see it in the workplace all the time. People being like, oh, so-and-so, insert East Southeast Asian person here. Can you take notes in this meeting? Whether or not that is actually their role, it's just like, oh, I see this, person that I immediately associate with as a servant. And that, or, someone that's here to do a thing for me. I think there's different ways that I see, particularly Southeast Asian folks being treated in the workplace, by students, even on the street. Like I witnessed something the other morning looking out my window where a white woman got very mad at a woman that I understood to be a Southeast Asian woman who was pushing a stroller, was in the way. So I guess what I would love to see is us taking up more space and folks who aren't part of our community starting to recognize the ways that their biases are moving into their everyday treatment of us. That's what I would see.
Judging, yeah, I love it. I love it. So we're going to take up more space. Jasmine, what does taking up space look like for Asian brothers?
Before I get to that, I just wanted to relate to you, Jai Ching, that I think similarly with my own father, very similar, kind of like, we come from a collectivist-based culture. Let's just do the right thing. Let's just keep our head down, as you were talking about earlier, Kristyn, and let's not rock the boat, right? Like, is very much the implicit message. And I think as my father has seen me take advocacy and see some success, I think it has empowered him, right? Really, and I think that's worth saying a couple of times. It's really empowered him to say, you know what, like if I'm treated poorly at the Home Depot, I'm going to tell somebody about it, right? Now, whether something happens is a different story, right? But I think just being able to give voice to that, I think to myself, in terms of our Asian brothers, like I think it's having to understand that their strength comes in many different ways, right? And that they too possess strength. And I think sometimes our best strength actually comes from our knowledge, comes from, even from our culture in some ways. Like some of the Southeast and East Asian cultures very much have this idea of kind of community spirit and community building, and so being able to ally with others. And I think that's kind of where we can actually make some headway. I think the other is that those that dare to be leaders, right, that we support them, right, because it's not easy once you get to the close to the top, if not at the top, right. because I think quite often there aren't enough people to support those individuals. And I think that we need to kind of support them. We may not agree, but I think that that's okay, right? I still think that we need to support them. And just to come back to your original question, like being invisible means being silent, which means we don't have a voice. And I think it's using your voice, right, is how we take up space. You know, or else how will people know of the anti-Asian sentiments that exist, the sexualized violence that the women in our community face on a daily, minute by minute, sometimes, you know, basis. And so that's kind of what I wanted to add to the discussion, and just kind of build upon what Jai-Ching was speaking to earlier.
So I love it. We're taking up space. We're going to rock the boat. Maybe we'll even tip the boat. Elene, what for the population that you're working with? I mean, it's already hard enough to take up space as an Asian person in white mainstream Canada, and I'm sure it's even having to break through for migrants, for sex workers. How do you even get noticed within the mainstream Asian community, let alone getting to places where decisions are made that aren't necessarily including you, whether it's City Hall or the House of Commons? You know, what does taking up space look like for your population there?
Yeah, I really appreciate Jai-Ching and Jasmine talk about like the importance of the individual voice and also like the community organizing piece, right? So, and I think that, as you say, the marginalized community is very difficult to speak out, but so that's why it's so important to use different creative way to make the voice being heard. And like, for example, we have a project called Power of Our Hand. Just taking a picture of the hand can be so powerful. And we do massage service in Chinatown Festival. So this is like educate other people to see how important of the work people is doing. And I think both is very important. We recognize everyone is different and have unique story, but at the same time, how to be the allies of other person, other people, and how to use different creative way to make the voice being heard. And particularly how the society divide us is because they put each other as enemy, how they divide us because they make the most oppressed have taken a lot of risks when they speak out, right? So, for example, people will be targeted by law enforcement if they speak out. But I think this is a very important collective work, build the allyship within Asian community and also different class within Asian community and also bigger Canadian society to recognize the complexity, including classism, you know, including the workers issue, including the migrant issue. And I think this is beautiful that we can have so many different stories, but by bringing story together, that can be very, very powerful. And how we can be allies of each other so that we stand up with each other when something happens. And I think this is very important. That is what I also learned from the community. No one believes the Asian massage parlor worker will go to City Hall and tell you that I need my work, I'm not the victim, I do not fear of the law enforcement. This is very hard, but with working together, that make it happen and also can make some unreasonable policy change. And I think this is what we want to see, more systematic change, like to have like more policy that is provoke like the racism and any kind of oppression disappear.
Yeah, so Elene, thank you. I mean, it took a lot of courage for the workers to appear at government, the House of Government, and so it sounds to me that, you know, allyship is pretty important. So when someone does speak up and say, hey, you know what, what's happening to me is wrong, and you have the power to do something, it's incredibly important for us to back each other up. So I want to be able to, you know, the 2021 has brought lots of changes, and some of those changes, including the fact that we have now a Marvel movie, Shang-Chi, Legend of the Ten Rings, where it stars an Asian Canadian in this major franchise. We are seeing another movie, Eternals. I just saw it, by the way. Go check it out. It's pretty fun. Where Gemma Chan is the lead, who carries like pretty much the entire film. So we've got Simu Liu, Gemma Chan, And it's starting to feel like, hey man, we're finally breaking through. And that's a great thing. Is that enough? Having a few faces, you know, take the helm of Hollywood. Are we expecting to see this global tide? Is what more needs to be done besides, you know, some representation, which matters, but where do we go from here? Because people are starting to say, hey guys, you've arrived. And what I'm hearing from you is, no, we haven't all gotten there.
More is needed. More is needed, right? Like, I just think to myself, I can't tell you, the minute that movie Shang-Chi came out, I had a number of students who, let's say, could actually audition for that part, told me that it's the one part that they can all audition for, right? And only one person can get it. And how sad is that? Like, how sad is that when there can actually be more opportunities? And so I would say that the 6 white men that lead up, actually 6 white men and 1 woman that lead up the major studios that promote Western culture around the world, need to consider more different types of popular culture vehicles, right? Like, you know, why did it take so long for, you know, for a movie like Crazy Rich Asians to come out, right? 2018, you know, when before that, The Joy Luck Club was decades before that, you know? And then, yes, sure, there's always Be My Maybe that came out later, Parasite, The Farewell, Minari, you know? I think we need more of that because, you know, what we see in those examples of popular culture are well-rounded, you know, Asian characters. And I think quite often are we relegated to these tropes that were, you know, ultra feminine or docile or submissive and quiet. We're not any of that. I mean, some of us might be, but we're not all of that. And I think we need more. And you know, I think to myself, if I was a youth today, I would very much enjoy the export of Korean culture, for example, you know, and how we're seeing BTS. Like, when I talk to, you know, young Asian men in my practice, do they gravitate to things like BTS because they see their reflection, and yet they're thirsty for more, right? They want more representation. And as I see some of my fellow panelists nodding their heads, I know I'm thirsty for more representation. It's like, you know, this Filipino-American comic, Joe Coy, right? He's coming out with a Filipino, you know, movie next year. I'm thirsty for it. Like, the last time I saw one was decades ago, right? And so it's like, when will we see more? So I say, Kristyn, it's not enough, right? And I think it'll be enough when we can say it's okay to see some bad films about Asian Americans or Asian Canadians, for that matter, right? I think that's when success will occur, when we can actually, you know, say it's okay to have, like, you know, an Asian, you know, all-star cast film that, you know, where I can say, it was okay. I didn't really like it, right? You know, because right now I think the set of films that are coming out, you know, there's almost a pressure to like it. Because if we don't like it, are we going to see more, or is, like, suddenly Hollywood going to say, you know, let's shut down the pipeline, which I think is a myth, by the way, but that's a different story. Anyways, I've said my piece on that. I'm sure my panelists would have more to say. I could probably talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I can jump in on that as well. And I agree, you know, popular culture is hugely powerful, both, you know, positively and negatively, around stereotypes, etc. But we need representation everywhere. You know, we know there's bamboo ceilings. We know, you know, that, you know, in academia, for example, you know, where are all the deans, you know, of all the different faculties? You know, what's, you know, I know in medicine, we only have, I think, two deans of medicine that are actually women, and I'm not sure how many are racialized. But these are all the areas in government. You know, we need to see more Kristyns, you know. We need them everywhere. I think it's great that Theresa Tam is seen as a racialized women leader, you know, in our country right now. But we need more of that to really combat all the, you know, the unconscious messages that we get, that basically, you know, white people are the ones that lead, that you know, that are you know, that need to be in those positions, because we don't see ourselves reflected there. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Jasmine. You know, we need to be there.
Joy, can I just say that I'm teaching a graduate class right now with master's students in counseling, and what was fascinating was I gave them an article to read about group leadership, you know, and what I told the class was throughout the entire course, I don't expect you to agree with everything, right? And in fact, there are going to be some research there that hopefully you're offended by it, and we should be able to talk about that in class on how it's bad design and promotes unconscious bias. And one of them was on group leadership. And what came out of this kind of study, it was really terrible, if I can just kind of call it that, for what it is, which said that basically prototypical leaders are white folk, and that if you are a BIPOC group leader, you need to take on a learning orientation so that people can hear you, right? And I was mortified, but I thought it was important for what I would say 70%, you know, of my class would identify with being BIPOC and other intersectional identities, and where they kind of shocked and outraged too. And I said, be careful for that type of research that goes out there. And then the last thing I want to say, Joy, is that I sat at a conference at the Canadian Association of University Teachers, and I looked around, it was a sea of white faces. And then I had to go to the people of color that I knew afterwards and say, you know, like, tell me that, that there's more of us around, right? And it is. So it kind of comes back to Elene and what you're talking about, like looking for allies and hooking up, you know, accordingly.
Yeah, no, that's Jasmine. Thank you so much for that very thoughtful contribution. I think that, you know, as we look for leaders, as we look for role models, and although progress is made, it sounds to me not only is there still a lot of work still to be done, but the progress that we identify is still rather limited. I want to be able to just explore that a little bit further, because obviously the academy, universities are places of higher learning. You would think that you know, there should be perhaps a bit more understanding, and the Asian population is not insignificant. I mean, we are pretty sizable. Anywhere you cut it across major cities in Canada, there's a good number of us. But I think to Joy's point, and also just everybody who has touched upon it, is that rarely do we see that leadership represented. So, you know, if we were to do an audit, I'm not trying to pick on, you know, X university here or any university, but if we were to do just a quick audit to see who's sitting in these dean chairs, who's sitting in the chancellor's chairs, who's sitting in, you know, all the president's chairs, you know, are we going to see the general population of students at these universities represented in those senior leadership positions, who's getting tenure positions and so forth. And if there was a message that we can deliver not just to universities, but perhaps to all the institutions across, you know, our Canadian life, whether it's hospital boards or perhaps other governments, you know, corporations, like, you know, should we be putting aside a certain number of seats where, you know, that may be the only way we get proper representation? Is that the approach? You know, how do we change what is inherently racist, where we're not going to be seen as leaders because we're not white enough, male enough, or tall enough, perhaps? You know, how do we address that? And is it one way, or is it a multitude of ways? Is a big question. Jasmine is brave enough to go first. Jasmine, and then Jai-Ching and Elene, I want you to lean into this as well.
Yeah, I don't want to, you know, I want to leave room for my panelists, of course, right? But I can say that, Kristyn, I've thought about this issue a lot. I think about kind of how do people, how does leadership get represented, or how do we have diversity in leadership? And I think that there's this idea that there's a pipeline issue. It's like, well, if we can just get enough people in the pipeline, but it is, the candidate pool is not the problem. Right? It is the processes. It is the chain of processes that eventually lead to people being in leadership. And Joy had mentioned that it's not just one bamboo ceiling, it's multiple bamboo ceilings, right? And so if you talk to, if you will, emerging professionals, you know, you'll find that they're like, you know what, I don't have any energy at the end of the day to go through another bamboo ceiling, you know? and that there's something wrong with the process, and it's multiple processes that need to be changed. If I think about the definition of thriving is the ability to have energy at the end of your day to do whatever you want, right? And so if I think about a typical average day, I hope to have enough energy to do a bit of sewing or go on a walk with my partner, right? Like, I hope that I have that energy at the end of the day. And I know that our counterparts, don't have that concern and are more likely to have energy to kind of spend, And so that needs to be taken into account, and these processes need to be reconfigured. Because if I think about faculty, right, like you were talking about kind of like the ascension of a faculty member all the way to being chancellor of a university or a president of a university, like let's think about how many steps that first has to occur. First, you have to get into graduate school, right? And then you have to get into a department. And then if you get into the department and you get tenure, right, making sure that that process isn't biased against you, right? Then you hope to one day be asked to be chair, or like people encourage you to be chair, and then eventually be the dean, right? And then eventually assume a vice provost role, and then to be a president. Like, that's 6 or 7 different bamboo ceilings that people have to kind of navigate. It's a tight wire act. And I can see why some people may get disheartened along the way, or just don't have the energy, and hope that the next generation will do it. So in any event, I think processes need to change.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Jiaqing, any reflections?
Yeah, I really appreciate, Desmond, what you're saying around, it not just being this pipeline issue that we talk about. I mean, and even in our office, because we do a lot of work with MSW students coming through, you talk about this idea of pipeline. But then there's just so many other processes that contribute to that, that set it up in that way. And then the flip of that, it ends up being that the problem is ours. Oh, we don't have enough of us in the pipeline. Like, no. That's not the issue.
That is a fancy way of blaming us, right?
Exactly.
It's a fancy way of blaming us, and that's why I say it's the processes that are biased, right?
Yeah. And like, I think when we think about having diversity in leadership, and Kristyn, you mentioned like having like a certain amount of seats set aside, like I think that's really tricky waters, especially for a group that's so diverse. As we started using the word Asian here, but like East and Southeast Asian folks, South Asian folks, West Asian folks, what do we mean? I think that's one thing when we're talking about this. And who would end up in those positions? Like, I know there are 3 of us here that are Chinese. Like, very often particular kinds of Asians are represented, even in the Shang-Chi, which I mistakenly called Shang-Chi for way too long. Like, even in movies like that, like the people that we're seeing are, Chinese folks, they're Korean folks, they're, they're not Southeast Asian folks. So what would that look like? And I think for me, when I think about how we can move there, is by working with other folks of color, by working with other BIPOC folks here, right? There's such a diversity of East and Southeast Asian cultures and people that we're never going to find the way that we exist here. So embracing that diversity, and then working with other folks who are also facing racism and having to deal with white supremacy on the daily, right? And then I think the other thing that we need from to get diversity in leadership is for white folks to step back, right? I won't name anyone, but someone that I've worked with and know who's done a tremendous amount of work in academia, and not at this school, but has like attained quite a fair amount of prominence, said to me once, "Oh yeah, well, the white people I work with can't look me in the eye, and that's okay." And I was like, "No, that's not okay. Like, you've gone through all these steps that Jasmine just described, and that Joy was talking about, to get to the point where you have a bit of a reputation, and people still can't look you in the eye. That's not our problem, right? Like, we can put in lots of work to develop our skills and get to these places, but at the end of the day, it's not our problem that they can't look us in the eye, right? That's their work to do, and I think it's okay to demand that they do it, right? I think that's what I would have to say about that leadership piece.
Yeah, no, Jai Cheng, thank you for that. I think you both have already brought up some pretty interesting points with respect to how we take up space and the flaws within the process on that even enables us, like rather than us charging down the door and saying, hey, I'm here, I need to be seen and I need to be heard. Those opportunities always aren't afforded to us. And I think that in spaces like university, just coming back to our topic, we're talking about, higher education spaces. I find them to be very hierarchical. There is a pecking order that, and Jasmine, you did a great job of sort of highlighting, what those processes look like for the student. Let's center this experience around the student, the one who's at the bottom of the rung, who's the most vulnerable. Those would be perhaps, racialized workers within the universities who don't have job security. How do we ensure that environment is going to be safe for them? And how do we protect them from what could be sexual violence that is perpetuated against them, and especially if they have to be East and Southeast Asian people? I'm going to hand it over to Joy and Elaine to perhaps answer that question.
Okay, I just want to throw in something else regarding the last question. The idea of quotas. Women Transforming Cities has sort of looked at this in terms of gender parity in municipal governments, and when we look at the sort of literature out there, the data out there, quotas, they do work, and they work the quickest. Are they the best? Are they the best method? Probably not. And just a quote from our focus group. One participant said, that you don't get diversity by asking people to apply, for those leadership positions. You get diversity by making it, the organization, hospitable and welcoming. And in terms of the latter question about, how do we create, safety, really, we're talking about safety for students. We need to work better at our training in having those conversations. Speaking up is hard, and we need to both train those who are speaking up, but also those who are receiving those, the messages of incidents of discrimination, of violence, etc. And at all levels. So all of the teachers, the TAs, anyone who has any kind of power differential with students needs to have this type of training and know what to do when someone comes forward and speaks up. We need to have good reporting systems. So, again, students feel safe in reporting whatever it is they feel they need to report. And then we just all need to really speak up as witnesses, as allies, as as we continue to learn ourselves about cultural, being all of us being more culturally intelligent and knowing about all the issues and all the how it manifests in an intersectional way. So, our institutions have many things that we could be doing to enable students to feel safe and then to be able to speak up.
So well said. Thank you, Joy. Elene, you want to take the last word?
Yes, I think that I did not mention I also in a PhD in the school, university. So when people say massage parlor is worker is precarious, at least they have 400 different massage parlor they can choose in Toronto. But how many university that people can choose, and how precarious that is create for student or people work in the academic. And I think that how white supremacy is so powerful because they create that vulnerability that people in different positions that they are so difficult to struggle and fight. And I think I totally agree with Joy, like that not only the leadership, like how fundamental systematically, how it's changed, like everyone really need to have the responsibility to address the racism in and also all kind of oppression like no matter like gender discrimination and all other things. And I think this is very, very important to have this fundamental change. So I'm in my master. I was being told racism is something too complicated and toxic. We don't talk about it in the university, social work program. Unbelievable. But because of the anti-Black Asian racism, then become the token, right? You see the group picture. Normally, we have one gay, one white, one, like that kind of token that, and I think the precarious will make people in those positions very difficult, and also who is often in that position, they also need to take up a lot of whiteness in order to survive. And I think that's why I believe that building the community, no matter in community or in university, that I really see amazing like Sexual Assault Center, that how they bring the diversity and how different TA using different way to support the racialized student, and I think and build the solidarity not only within the Asian community but also other community, and also address like keep thinking who is being left behind, right? So that how we have being oppressed at the same time having the privilege, and I think this is very important. Yeah.
Elene, thank you so much. I mean, to all of you, you have spoken so eloquently and in a very, sort of heartfelt way on how we tackle this very difficult subject matter. And I am forever grateful the time that you've taken to spend with us today. There were so many different learnings, and I'm so pleased that we went all over the place. And I knew this was going to be tough, to be quite honest. This is a really big subject to tackle within an hour, but you took us through so many different of those rungs. Some of the things that we learned today is that we have to reevaluate the process, which I think we can all pretty much agree to, but also that sometimes we need to be able to just carve out the space and say, this seat is reserved for this individual, and just hold it down until somebody gets there. And that means that somebody else has got to give up their seat in order for that to happen, or you pull up another chair and make the table bigger and broader. Taking up space is important. Self-care is important. Taking care of leaders and each other, of course, and even daring to lead. Like, people have told us repeatedly, time and time again, sit down, be quiet. We're not doing that anymore. I just want to say, not only are you telling us to rock the boat, that perhaps we should even tip over the boat, and hopefully each of us will be able to catch each other in the water. I want to thank all of you. Elaine Lam, thank you so much. Jai Ching Wilson Yang, Dr. Joy Masuhara, as well as Jasmine Mendoza. You have been an absolute delight to speak with, and I've learned so much from you today. Thank you again to X-University Ryerson and to the organizers of this national conference. This was a very important conversation. I know on behalf of the panelists and I, we are very grateful for the opportunity to bring the subject matter to light, and hopefully the dialogue will continue. All the very best, everyone, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, everyone. We've disabled the stream, so we are now good to go. That was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Kristyn, for such excellent moderation.
Great moderating.
You guys are amazing.
Everyone spoke so well. Thank you.
Amazing. That's so great.
I can't believe how the subjects stretched. They could do almost an entire conference just on sexual violence.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Please take care, everybody. I know it's nice to connect with all of you. Thank you to Natasha in the back end. We couldn't see everybody, but you made it so smooth. It seems to me all the tech problems we experienced getting on board we didn't have, so that was nice. Joy, thank you for joining us from BC and managing the time difference.
You're very welcome. It wasn't a big deal.
Okay.
The time. And it was great to meet all of you, and good luck in all of your work, and be lovely to collaborate. Again, with what you're doing. So we'll be in touch.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Be safe.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.
Kristyn.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Dr. Lamb.
Both of you are amazing. Thank you. It's,
Oh, thank you. Thank
it's
you.
really
nice to
so
see you.
great and really.
Oh, you were wonderful too.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
just incredible work you're all doing. It's hard work. So
Yeah.
okay, well, we'll keep on the fight. How do we get out of here? Is that
We just close it.
Yeah, I
we
guess
just
so.
close it out? Okay. Okay.
Okay,
Take
bye-bye.
care. Have a
Jishan,
good
it's
night.
really
Bye.
great to see
Bye.
you again.
Yeah, so
Thank
good
you.
to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
What is my thing? Oh my god.
You just exit the tab or